sound check for all the newbies that got on the webinar. There's a little guy at the top of your screen. Go ahead and raise your hand if you can hear me. Alrighty, looks like we're good to go. So thank you so much for your interest and participation. This is our final social media webinar. I'm sure by now everyone is just a total social media guru, ready to go. You've got your plan together. You've got your examples and your policies. I see that Estelle is on. Hello, Estelle. Welcome to the webinar. I want to go ahead and go through some housekeeping items for those of you that are new to our webinars. Up at the top, if you do have a slower connection or maybe you're having issues with your browser, we have a call-in number that you can call. It was also in your reminder email. Go ahead and call there if you're having any technical issues with the audio and the webinar. Beneath that, we have the chat pod. This is where you get to pose all of your questions, chit-chat with the participants, and as I always mention, this is the place where many of you have shared some very interesting tips, some great feedback on some of the things that have worked or have not worked out for your organizations or companies, as well as communicated with our various guest speakers and participants. So it's really important for you, especially since you're going to be muted until the Q&A portion, to share during the, using the chat pod. Beneath the chat pod, you have a file share. These are all the documents that we have shared throughout the webinar series, including the PowerPoint for today. So just go ahead and scroll down, select the file name, and then save it to your computer. Now to the right hand of that, this is just a good way for us to figure out where you're at in your social media process. So many different people are, anywhere. It ranges from very familiar, and they've got some things to teach us. There's other folks that are just learning to become a little bit more comfortable with their usage, and everything in between. So this is just a way for us to figure out what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and switch over your screen. In the meanwhile, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat pod. I want to make sure that everyone shares their information. And if you do have a Twitter handle or a LinkedIn profile, that's the kind of information you have from me. Go ahead and add it in the chat. This is a great way to network with folks, especially because this webinar is really specific on policy. That means that all of you here are pretty much people within an agency or an organization or a workforce area. And with that said, so this webinar in the series is in partnership with Southern Illinois University Carbondale Center for Workforce and Educational Development. And so this was all done as a part of a project with them to be able to teach some of their undergraduate folks how to utilize social media in the workplace and to be able to really take advantage. I see that JD from Upperly Global is on. Thanks so much, JD. Welcome. And it's really about being able to learn how to utilize these free tools. Now, of course, there may be no cost or very little cost, but it does cost your time. So a lot of this will be based on being able to now kind of wrap up all of the various different information that we've shared. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this webinar is really to help you develop internal staff and policies. So that means training as well as kind of the rules on how to support, as well as define social media use in your organization. And this is really going to differ, and you may think, okay, well, this is all kind of general, or maybe I need a little bit more specific information, and you could go ahead and reach out to us. That's definitely no problem. We also share a lot of case studies information throughout. But this is really about to, one, identify the existing talent that you have, or maybe a gap, so you may have to fill a position and figure out what that kind of looks like. It's about defining the roles, whether they're new employees or current employees. You may have to update that. And the process for which engagement is done within your organization. It's going to be about managing and maintaining your organizational message and impressions, and all of that has to do with customer service. And then the last bit is just to share some best practices from two different social media stars that I found that I thought were really interesting, just to give you an idea of what other people are doing. And, like all things on the internet, if it's really good, steal it and make it your own, and make it work for your group. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So my name is Juana Maria, and this is me, in case you're wondering what I look like, since I'm always online for most of you. And I'm the Workforce Development Specialist with Illinois workNet. Illinois workNet is a program and portal for the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and it supports a lot of our WIA, Workforce Investment Act services and resources, and so I'm sure a lot of local workforce area folks are on. Go ahead and give a shout out from your LWIA so we know where you're at. I know that we have Mike that's on. We have a couple folks from Crystal Lake that are on, so go ahead and say hello. We workforce folks are kind of endangered species. So to give you an idea, our webinar agenda for today, there we go, we have Joanne. We're going to go through the series overview, and this is actually really important because we start the social media webinar series with our social media strategy, and your policy is really defining that strategy, and so a lot of that will be very important in kind of wrapping it all in and making sure that you remember and utilize all that. For those of you that are on for the first time, this will actually be really good because you'll know where to go back and learn more about. We'll go through developing your policy and what that entails and the things that you should include. And then I'll give you some examples that I found from Kodak and Capital One. So the first webinar that we did was on social media strategy. And so we started out with really going through kind of the relevance of social media. And so we gave an example, for instance, with radio. It took about 38 years for those of you that were on for the first webinar to hit the masses. And it just talks about how, Google and all of these various internet sources, as well as now social media, have hit the masses from iPods to iPads to Facebook to Twitter in less than a year, and they had millions, if not billions, of users. So it just really kind of creates this context for the importance of understanding how to utilize these resources, because this is where people are at, and this is where you get access to the various target audiences that you need to reach out to. The other part that we covered in the social media strategy webinar is all of your social media activity is going to be based on your objective, whether it's your business model, whether it's your various means of communication. What are you trying to do? And a lot of this that we're covering today, and the reason why we kind of try to keep it as broad as possible to cover everyone, is going to be based on what your purpose is in utilizing these resources. And so with our social media strategy, we really went through and identified some goals, and we used Illinois workNet. And so we talked about, what's your pitch? If your first goal is going to be customer service, for instance, your pitch for customer service would be real-time answers for real-time questions, right? We said our point is to give people information. We wanted to say that our one thing is about seamless third-party access to tools. And then our relationship, because we are an online portal, if people know that we are real-time information on Workforce Investment Act resources and services, and understanding, this is the place to go for me to find out if there's new training programs out there, if there's new funds out there, if there's new providers out there. And then, the people that support those types of activities are our staff. And so I kind of went through what that all looks like on our end. So depending on if, for instance, you have folks that are really good with outreach, they may do all of your outreach communication. If you have folks that are really good on a program or project type, then you would go ahead and have them be the ones that talk about, your evangelizers that talk about, what kind of information that you share. And so JD asks, what does your one thing refer to? And actually the best example, for instance, is with Disney, their one thing is magic, right? With Volvo, their one thing is, quietness or sound, right? Because they're very quiet cars. With Mercedes, it's luxury, right? So what you have to think of for your one thing, JD, would be, for instance, immigrants, right? That's your one thing. That's what you focus on, or a highly skilled workforce. And so you want to be able to always customize and focus that communicational tool, image, or message within that context. So that's what the one thing is. So your people are the folks that are going to be the best ones to talk about these things depending on what their expertise is. Your process is about, how many times are you going to post things? What kind of schedule do you have? And we have Chelsea Jones on here with workNet as well, and she does a lot of our scheduling. And we all tag team, but we do have a standard on the things that we cover throughout our week, so maybe she can share a couple of examples in the chat, where it's really about, sometimes there is such a thing as overkill, and then if you don't post enough, people think, oh, they're not being consistent, and so you don't want to have inconsistencies as well. And then the last bit that we covered with our strategy is the type of metrics that you're going to use. And so this means traffic, this means interactions, engagement, analytics, so on and so forth. And there's so many different tools now that are embedded within not just your social media tools, as well as the management tools that help you kind of keep control of all your various profiles. The next one was our social media basics webinar, and it really just kind of covered, what does your image and your message look like? How do you make connections? So who are the people? If you want to be a well-informed social media professional or user, you want to know who are the people and the things that I need to follow. So we kind of gave you some tips. And by the way, all of these webinars are archived and available on Illinois WorkNet, so we'll go ahead and include that link in there for you. But it's really about how do I ask the right questions? Because social media is always changing. You need to know where to look. And so we shared the various aggregators that you should subscribe to. We shared the various influencers, the types of trends that are going on and where to find those trends. And so a big part of this, even for myself, I've been doing this for a couple years now, but in the beginning it was really just kind of poking around and playing and figuring out, this is really relevant. These people were well rated or have lots of followers. These are the common topics, and it's going to be based on your topic of interest or your cause or your, various references or information that you're seeking. So this is a really good way to kind of wrap your mind around that with our social media basics. We also talked about, as I mentioned earlier, social media tools are free or relatively low cost at this point, but it's really important to know what your relevance is, right? What kind of an impact are you making? And so we discussed social media return on investment, or what we call a return on engagement, and it's really about, the end result. You have to have outcomes. Although there's still unclear measurements as to how to produce, for instance, social media impressions into sales, there's definitely a bigger benefit in engagement and being a part of the conversation to your business or your product or your organization than not being involved or engaging at all. And so this is something to really think about. And so we covered all of these tools just to kind of have an understanding of what you need to be a part of. Then we went through kind of, this is what your average person on Twitter is, and this is what happens with your message. We talked about the new upgrades and timeline on Facebook. We discussed the types of people, their various levels of professionalism, and really how to utilize LinkedIn for either finding your ideal candidate, for finding your ideal job, or for building partnerships. And this is really important in the nonprofit and public service world, because we're always constantly seeking out whether it's local employers or various folks in our neighborhood, in our regional area, that are doing the things that we're doing. So this is a great way to be able to have, for instance, LinkedIn groups, to be able to post jobs for free. This is also a big one for all of us, right? And so to be able to utilize all these resources. And of course, we cover the Hootsuite, because people then become panicked when they hear of all the things that they need to create profiles for, and there's tools out there like Hootsuite that help you manage all of that. And so we covered, how do you schedule your tweets so you can spend maybe an hour a week scheduling all your information and then spending the rest of the time on the fly responding to the various questions or types of conversations that come up from those posts. We talked about blogging and how, sometimes we don't have a hand in what people say about us, but we do have a hand in what we can say about ourselves and things that we're doing, especially with the WIA authorization information. We talked about how you can share success stories, how you can start blogging, and how that creates some serious relevance and traffic for your website. And so this is just a great way to be able to really share your information. And I see that Chelsea just posted that she just scheduled social media for today through June 7th. Phew. And I'm telling you, she's really good. And we'll show you a couple clips on some of the information that she's sharing. The other thing is really utilizing YouTube. YouTube is almost, if not as relevant as Google. And it's the ultimate how-to place to find out from, the various cat videos that are uploaded on YouTube to learning how to make things and do things. And so don't underestimate, and especially in the world where nobody reads anymore, creating personalized messages to your audience with your YouTube videos, as well as tutorials on how to do things. These are all great places to be able to create a channel on YouTube and be able to showcase what you do as an organization. Of course, having RSS feeds and subscriptions, this is all about having information come to you instead of you having to worry about seeking out information. And then, of course, the power of collaboration with the wikis as well as Wikipedia, and really being able to collaborate and do so in a free environment where you're not bombarded by all the various emails when organizing events or job clubs or various things going on with your organization. Then the fourth webinar was alternative HR resources, and what we did is we went through very, very detailed descriptions of really how to create partnerships. And so really reaching out, and so I did, here is a print screen of a search on Twitter for workforce, and then the top tweets that come up there. So this is really about building that network, right? Then the top people that you want to connect with, the top videos that have been uploaded, as well as images. We talked about how to utilize everything from Twitter to LinkedIn to Facebook to be able to post jobs. I know this is a really big thing for all of our local workforce area folks. And it's really important to be able to cut out the middleman. And the middleman in the old days used to be the monsters and the career builders. And now we get to have direct access to various individuals and talent to be able to share information. And so a really great example with the upgrade to Twitter since our last webinar series was that companies are really promoting their company culture with their Twitter videos. And so it's just interesting to be able to say, hey, this is your dream job. This is why you want to work here. We're diverse. We're creative. We have great incentives, And so really think about, especially we'll talk later about cultivating staff and finding staff. You want to find them in those creative environments where they're not going to read some standard job posts. They're going to watch a video on the job post, or they're going to read a tweet or follow you on Facebook. So really think about what that means to you as an organization. And then lastly, we had JD, our guest, talk about your personal brand. And that really means in every sense for you as an individual, for you as an organization, and then for you as an agency, what does that brand represent? Who do you want to, and this is your one thing, back to JD's question, how is your one thing going to come out through the various messages and images that you're going to share? And so it's really about utilizing your personal brand, and we did a specific focus on LinkedIn and kind of finding that ideal job or candidate. And then the last webinar that we did was about managing your social media image. And so we talked about, your organization is made up of, and I'm going to get my little pointer out here, is made up of your image, your message, and your brand ambassadors. And these are your staff people. There's no way that you are going to be able to kind of, get away from that. And so you really have to think about, how am I going to make this work? And so that two-way interaction, and that's what social media is on. That's why you're on this webinar, right? We don't want to just post stuff out and talk to ourselves. We want to be able to really be able to communicate with our community. So your users are then able to take all those things that you have communicated with them and narrate them, comment on them, and share. So there's this brand new layer of authenticity and transparency that's really important, because you can no longer be schizophrenic. One day you're like a vet specialist, and then the next day you're an astronaut, right? So this is really about you as an organization. How are you going to consistently, on a daily basis, represent yourself and then manage that type of image? Because there are going to be people out there, I'll tell you, even with our webinars, there's folks that were really frustrated because they didn't, get on or whatever, and then they blew up all of us on Twitter. And it's interesting because you can't just delete things, right? And so you have to learn, how are you going to manage these types of interactions, because nobody's, spared in any sense. And so it's really important to kind of go through all of that information and figure out what that means for you. Now, I have a question posted on here. What would you guess are some of the common challenges to developing a social media policy? I'm going to let you go ahead and add that in the chat. I see people typing. Getting everyone on board, absolutely. Simple lack of knowledge of where to start, very good. Well, Kristen, you would now know that you start with the first webinar, correct? I see Debbie and Myrna. Typing, so we'll wait and give them a chance. Clearly defined plan, very good. And Debbie, you'll see later on that there's a lot of folks out there, even within the corporate world, that don't have a clearly defined plan. The firm's message or brand, absolutely. So I'll go ahead and let folks kind of put their information out here. The first one that I have on here is the first challenge is establishing acceptable use of social media for work purposes. And that is going to be completely specific to you as an organization, you as an agency, you as a local workforce area, university, brand, product, whatever you may be, right? That's going to be really dependent on what you think and what your activity is going to be like online. The other one is setting standards. Oops, give you a freebie. Setting standards, so that really means, the quote-unquote rules. What are the rules? And then how are you going to define if you've done well in that type of interaction? The next one I have is defining appropriate customer information. And so, for instance, and you'll see some of the examples later on, but, what exactly can you communicate about? And so in the workforce world, to give you an example, certain people think it's safe to put their social security numbers online, if they have like a question about their training or whatnot. And it's just so dangerous. And so you have to have all the right things in place to be able to say, hey, that's not an appropriate use of information. Or on the other end with your staff, it's about really being able to, share with them and give them guidance and have them have resources or have access to resources on the do's and don'ts of what people should share. The next one I have is determining how and who to handle customer service feedback. And then this can be handled in numerous ways. A lot of, and I'll give you an example towards the end, but you could have a protocol based on, for instance, if there are various buckets of questions that people ask a lot of questions about, you could have frequently asked questions. You can have a standard response based on, whatever indicators you might set up for your organization. So that's really important. And then the last one, and this is the hardest one I think for most of us, is lack of key stakeholder buy-in. And I'll tell you right now, if social media is not accepted or not encouraged or looked down upon in your organization, you could have the most creative staff, you could have the best folks in place, it's not going to go anywhere. Because if your leadership is not actively engaged in this process, it's not going to work. So I'm going to put that out there directly, because a lot of this is going to be, because leadership is what handles the firewall and network type issues. Leadership is the one that approves various trainings and hirings, right? And so it's very difficult to develop any kind of organizational change without them giving you approval or heads up. So before I continue on, any other questions? I see that Debbie wrote, I've been interviewing and employers seem to be fishing for answers to come from potential employees. Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure they've got plenty of things that they need to hear answers about. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first one, with people. So I'm going to post some questions on here for you. So I'm going to give you kind of the overlay of what your social media policy looks like. And so basically, it's divided up into 3 different pieces. Your social media policy is going to be about the type of people that you have and what they do. It's going to be about their process, right? And so this is engagement, this is frequency, this is quality of answers, appropriate answers, so on and so forth. And then the various standards that you're going to hold these interaction and activities to. And that's what your social media policy is. I know a lot of people think, okay, well, I need very specific defined steps and rules on how to be able to integrate this. The challenge with doing that with social media is that it's always changing. So you really need to allow yourself for a little bit of space to be able to cover that as you're going through this process. So the first one that we're starting off with is people. And so the question that I have is, what kind of social media activity will you be involved in? So I'm going to go ahead and give folks a minute to just kind of share from their perspective in the chat what kind of social media activity they're involved in. What do you anticipate this will look like for your organization? I see Connie is typing. Okay, we have a couple of folks. I'll come back to you. The second question is, what are your specific objectives? And this goes back to your strategy, right? What is the point? Like, why are you doing this? What do you want to do? Do you want to do customer service? Do you want to do promotional material? Do you want to educate? And I see that Connie, for instance, wrote primarily Facebook for community education and training, and that's perfect. Because that is her point. That's her one thing. They're doing community education. So they're going to distribute information. They're going to distribute various maybe tutorials or resources or materials. Kristen shares largely Facebook and YouTube. I'd be very curious to see how you're using YouTube, Kristen. Michael says Facebook and tweets, maybe even YouTube videos to show how he teaches. Very good. Promotional information about products and sales. Perfect. And a lot of that, what you'll notice on Facebook now, is with timeline, much of the way that information is manipulated is through images. So for folks like Charles, who's really trying to promote their brand and their product, Facebook is a fantastic place to do that, because you could manipulate the size and the viewing access to your various people that have liked your company page or product, and so this is a really good way to be able to do that. And then I have Kristen. Tricon helps with workforce development. We have construction worker videos on YouTube. Fantastic. So this is a really great way to basically promote the type of videos that you have. And go ahead, Kristen, and share your YouTube channel with us. We'd love to subscribe to it. We actually, I'll have Chelsea go ahead and add our YouTube channel. You can follow us on there, and it's a great way to be able to really make that stuff viral. You know, we spend a lot of time putting these things together. It's important to get that information out. The next question that I have is, along with that, what are your role-specific business outcomes? So you want to promote, right, your videos, Kristen. So how will you know if you've done a good job, right? That's what this question asks, is how do you know if you fulfill your outcomes? Is it the number of subscriptions? Is it the end result of what that video is? So somebody may be registering for a program, or you know, doubling your network. Or, for instance, Michael put on here by asking students how they got in touch with us. Very good. So this is part of your intake process, right? So these are the types of questions that you need to ask yourself on how am I going to figure out if my people that I have applied to this role or task or position are doing what I want them to do and have outcomes, you know, based on my business model, my organizational mission or objectives. And so the first thing that I have here, and I'm just going to add them all in so we can have it up, is the first one that I want you to focus on is skills. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a pod. And here is my question. My question to you all is, what are your social media knowledge, skills, attributes, and other characteristics? What do you think for the people that you're looking to do this, what types of skills do you think that they would need? Go ahead and add that in the chat. And what we'll do here is, the reason I'm having it in a separate chat is because once we're done, these can be your keyword searches for your job description. So by the time we're finished with this webinar, you'll have a template on things, and of course I'll include this in the follow-up email, on things that you can include as part of your plan, so you don't have to start from scratch. Once we're done with this webinar, you'll be able to say, hey, we have these resources and information as kind of a crowdsourcing option for your social media policy. So go ahead and add, so Michael says knowledge of Twitter and YouTube. Very good. We'll see if anybody adds anything on there. So the next question that I have on here is, what is the role this individual will fill? And so specifically, you know, we think about what's the job title. Is it a content person? Is it a marketing person? And then what are those requirements and social media qualifications that you may need? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up another share pod. So go ahead and add your role. What do you think this individual, what kind of role will they fill? Let me make it a little bit smaller so we can continue to share. The next question that I have here is, will there be training involved, right? So this is new staff that you may hire versus the staff that you have. So I've added training on here. And then the last question that I have that I think is very important is, you know, social media and the use of social media and this knowledge and the various things, skills that you think are important as a staff person, they're very specialized skills, right? It's not every person that's comfortable or efficient or creative to be able to really know how to communicate the various messages that you have for your organization. So how will you reward them? Are there performance incentives? Are there benefits? What type of salary are you providing these folks? And I know that these are very tough questions, especially in the public sector, but there are ways to kind of get around that. So it could be, you know, working from home. It could be, you know, various things that they can be included on as exposure or so on and so forth, promoting them as the specialist on your website or portal. So just think of what these things look like for you as an organization and what you would be able to afford as a reward. So I'm going to go ahead and add that here. Sorry everybody. I just put that down. There you go. So go ahead and add the last one. What is the reward that you're going to add? Or the types of things that you think you can offer as a benefit for their specialized skills and qualifications maybe. And in case you didn't have a chance to kind of finish in the other ones, don't worry. I'll give everyone a chance to fill it in as we're going along. We do have a couple of other pods to add on here, and I will make sure to share this with everyone so you can have a start on your plan. I'm going to give folks one more. So I see Kristen wrote on here that social media is fun. So the duty in itself is the reward. I would love if folks could put that on there, and I think Chelsea, who does social media for us, may be the #1 person that could go on there. I don't necessarily know if that's the reward, because social media is hard work, and especially really building a network and building, the reach that you have, because you can promote the best messages and information, but if you don't have anybody that's listening to that stuff, it's not going to go anywhere. So I definitely would be careful with that one, because people do want recognition. They want various benefits. So it's not playtime. For some of us, it's really fun, but it's definitely also just as real as all the other requirements that people have. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide, and we'll go ahead and add those into the pods. So the second one that I have on here is social media skills, and so I've added on here. And so the questions, we cover this a lot on our past webinars, but the social media skills that your and characteristics or qualities that your staff may need are actually really, really important. So the examples that I gave is they need to have a passion for your industry. So these are your champions. And more likely than not, what you're going to have is you're going to have various people within, ideally within your leadership team that kind of coordinates and interacts with the various levels of management. You're going to have people in your middle management. So if you have like a sales team, if you have a marketing team, and if you have maybe an advocacy team, what you do is you have one person from each of those groups or departments be your champion. And then you'll have the lower level staff, or various from interns to support staff that really flush out and do all that homework for you, and they're the real champions. They're the ones that are going to be able to get that message across and be able to relay and communicate with your audience. The next one is varied experience, right? So you want them to have experience in the stuff that they do. So for instance, if it's the construction industry or if it's in communications, you want them to be able to, although they're learning a new skill set maybe with social media, communication should not be learned along with that, right? So you have to be able to take what you know and hit the ground running. The other thing that I have is resourcefulness and flexibility. And so for folks that have been doing this for a while, you know how flexible you need to be and how clever you need to be about the type of information, or really being able to communicate the same thing in different ways for various audiences. And then of course personality, and I know that every single person on this webinar has quite a personality, so very, very important, because it's really about having a way to communicate and access people. The other thing that I have on here for social media role is what is the role that this individual will fill. And so we went through the various information and resources, And so what I shared in the other webinar are the various job titles, and this is actually really, really important. Are they going to be your strategist or your specialist? And most people, hire consultants to be strategists. They're the ones that design the plan on this is, how you're going to communicate, and these are the various topics, and these are the weeks and the days, and the posts on various information. Are you going to have a brand manager? And so this is really about community management, right? This is, what am I going to do as PR for my company? What am I going to do as promotional information for my online community? How am I going to have a community of users with two-way communications, right? Is it going to be a content writer? Is it going to be somebody that's going to revamp your website or revamp the type of information and how it's written and how it's communicated on your various social media tools, so from Twitter to Facebook to LinkedIn? And then the last one is are you going to have a marketing manager that kind of does all that? And what you'll notice is that currently about 30% of social media is done as bloggers or content writers. And I would actually agree. A lot of this, although we don't have a content writer because we all do a lot of our own content on Illinois WorkNet, based on the various information we get from local areas, it all started as content and sharing content, and then it moved on to really saying, okay, what's our plan though? Like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make this efficient? How are we going to work it out? And so what's really interesting with all of that is once you define who this is, and I have a really great post here on, I found an infographic, and of course, we love our infographics at Illinois WorkNet. But once you define what that role is there going to be social media training involved? And so if there is, you have two options, and this is really great. And by the way, this is a live link for those of you. You can click on it, and you can see the full run-through on the infographic. But, there's two options. Typically, people will either hire someone from outside, if they have the budget for it, or enable employees to manage their social media, which is more likely than not, right? And so what this consists of is actually separating your groups into training workforce, because a lot of people have a lot of various, basically qualities or efficiencies or even level of comfort in utilizing social media. And so you don't want to be able to kind of lump everybody in a group and say, these are the types of things that we're going to work on today, when some people don't even feel comfortable with their email or with the various tools that we have on our daily work life, right? And so the idea here is, although it seems like, getting someone from the outside is the safest choice because they're already trained and ready to go, it's actually better for you to be able to really do this successfully with your various employees that have the context and have the content of your organization and mission. And so it's really cool because we have kind of these pots of people that we've added on here. And so the first one that you have is the digital natives. And these are basically the millennials that have grown up with the digital technology and social media world. And so this is more about company-specific information. Your training would look based on your goals and how to measure the various activities that they have, and less on the use of technology. Then to the right of that, you have the savvy technologists. And these are the folks that were probably not raised within social media or web technology, but have really taken it on and have taught themselves how to use it. And so the training here would focus more on the various platforms, and so how we have the tutorials on setting things up, and then how the company or organization wants to utilize them to engage their audience. Then the one beneath that, to the left-hand side, we have the reluctant user. And these are the folks that are familiar enough with the big-name social media networks, like Facebook, for instance, but haven't adopted them in their daily use. And this is really about training them to use social networks that they are familiar with and then get them started, one by one, little by little, on the stuff that they're maybe not so familiar with. So for instance, like Pinterest that just came out. And then on the right-hand side, you have the digital constraints. And these are the folks that are really opposed to any type of social media stuff. Just, I think in general, digital age stuff, and thinks it's just a fad, and so they're going to wait out until the fad kind of passes. And this training should really be focused on why is there a benefit from the skill of social media campaigns, and then what are useful tactics for the company. So just think of all the information that you can share, and you'd have to share in very different ways depending on the type of staff that you have. So as I mentioned, I'll go from left to right, and I'll go ahead and use this. Despite the dangers of unrestrained employee social media use, 76% of companies, this is all very current information, do not have a social media policy. So me personally, I applaud you for one, being on this webinar, because if 76% of folks don't even have a social media policy, you're far ahead of the game. So you should give yourself a pat on the back for this one, just for being on and having the foresight to say, hey, this is really important, this is what I need to do. The other thing that I have on here is, what about personal use of social media? And we have tons of information on an upcoming webinar, on an upcoming slide on that information. But the truth is that your employees are your brand. You really don't have, any way to kind of shut people up, because all of that is going to be reflective. Your people are going to be your company. And so what you have to do is put in place enough empowerment and accountability to be able to have them speak on behalf of the company, and then give them examples of what that is and what that isn't. And so, for instance, I have on here, never allowed to share information such as numbers, internal communication, or performance data. And so in the workforce world, it would obviously be client information and so on and so forth. So it's really about establishing, what does that information mean to you, right? And so back to the roles that we have. So depending on what you pick for these roles, if they're going to be a copywriter, okay, if they're going to be a specialist, if they're going to be a manager, an online community manager, if they're going to be a public brand manager, or strategist, or so on and so forth, you're going to really have to be able to give them that reward. And so you'll notice, for instance, Chicago is the 8th most highly paid social media location. And so these are the various salary ranges that you would get for that. So the next one that I have on here is about your process. So before we get started with your process, any questions on the information with people? Looks like we're all good. Nobody's typing, so please go ahead and include those in the chat pod if you do have questions. So the first one is, what are your social media goals? Are they going to be marketing? Are they going to be customer service? Are they going to be sales? I know Charles is on here and he's doing sales. Or is it just going to be about engagement, about getting the word out, about getting exposure for your group? The next one is, what is your relationship with your audience? And then what would you like it to be? And then how much time do you want dedicated to social media activities? And so I'm going to go ahead and get these started. So the top 3 tips that I have on here is mitigate. So the first one is, you really want your social media policy to be able to address the risks of social media by having some general guidelines. You're not going to be able to cover everything under the sun, because then there's no freedom to be creative or to articulate. But you do want to focus on things that protect not just the organization, but the staff itself. And part of that is with your training. So the next one is informing both the staff and the various partners on organizational values. And so you want to be able to share that information and have them have access to it. And then the last one that I have on here is trust, and this is about providing, as I mentioned before, the right balance between how do I empower you, yet hold you accountable as a staff person. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new chatbot on here. So the first one is, what are your goals? Go ahead and share your goals as an organization. Give folks a minute to catch up. The next one I'm going to add on here is your relationship. What is this relationship with your audience? And then what would you like it to be? And then the last one is going to be about time. So let folks, I see that Kristen wrote, our membership is exactly that, paid members. Chelsea wrote, her goal is to have our message reach a large number of people, and we are definitely doing that. I see Debbie wrote, she has a weekly schedule in mind, which I think is very reasonable and doable, especially if you start using something like Hootsuite, you'd be able to really get that going. Relationships, build trust and get new students. That's a great, I think that may be more of a goal than a relationship, but maybe that's part of your relationship. Very good. So these are really great answers, and I'm going to give you another minute to kind of add this on if you want to continue. But it's really about being able to identify these things for you as an organization, or as, you know, you're the one-man or one-woman show, right? And so you want to say, these are the things that are important to me, and this is how I'm going to go about them. So this is a big part of your plan. And so something that was shared with all of you on the previous webinar by John Durango from the Chicagoland Chamber is a lot of that, and you'll notice that he has this three-tiered process, is based on your roles and responsibility. So who is responsible for creating marketing communication strategy? Who dictates the content and where it's used? Who oversees your various teams? So let's say maybe you're in charge of this for your local workforce area or for your local department. How many people do you have? What are they going to each talk about? And then how are you going to manage that? Where is your time allocation for that? Who writes the reports? Who ensures that content aligns with strategy? You know, who's going to create the regular scheduled weekly meetings to gather information, or so on and so forth. So it's really about, you know, having the strategy, and all of this is covered with really good examples in our previous webinar. So I highly encourage for you to check this out, because he shared some amazing information, and the Chicagoland Chamber has about 2,000 members, so it's really been tested out and works well. And then the last part is, so you'll see that this is 3 different tiers. Who helps along with the manager? Who adds the content to the website? Who does the various corrections, for instance? And so this is really important to kind of add on there. And then, so with that, John gave us a really specific example, for instance, with content creation. And so who does it, how it's done, and then who adds it to the website. See, Steve is reaching out to Kristen. Very good. See, this is why I love these webinars, because folks could just communicate with one another. The last one that I have on here is standards. And so these are the various tools. And depending on where you are in your process, you'll need to know what am I going to use. And a lot of you have kind of shared already you want to do either YouTube and Facebook, or you just want to work on Twitter, so on and so forth. What is your scheduled process, which we've covered in the timing, and then what kind of information will you be sharing, and so promotional, educational, customer service, so on and so forth. And then the last bit is really about your impact. You want to know that you're doing a good job, right? You want to know that all this time that you've spent from this webinar to your weekly tweet schedules have relevance and are really making an impact. And so I went and I added the 3 things that you should focus on are the tools. So, you know, who will be in charge of your network? Who is going to be, although Hootsuite has a way to manage all of these various profiles, who will manage Hootsuite? Posts. You know, what kind of information will you be sharing? Do you have any disclaimers? And then lastly, with analytics is how will you address customer service, right? How will you evolve based on the various comments? Or, you know, maybe people aren't hitting tweets that you thought were going to be really popular. How are you changing up your social media communication plan to be able to address the needs of your audience? And so the first thing that I have on here, and a big question that we have with most agencies as well as public service nonprofits is, you know, what do we do about scheduling tweets off hours? And so what you'll notice here is a print screen of Hootsuite, and what I posted on here is scheduling posts helps get around the issues of off-hour postings because it can all be scheduled ahead of time and it can be done on work hours. And so this is a really good way to be able to get information out there without worrying about how are staff going to respond to this in the evenings or so on and so forth. The next thing that I have on here, and so this is what our scheduler looks like, our weekly schedule, and I added the disclaimer helps you manage expectations or emerging issues. And so and what I added on here that's really, really important is this should include some kind of short statement on what you will or won't respond to. And then something directing them, a link to your website to either a contact person, further information, the Q&A, so on and so forth, right? So this is really important, and what I did is I actually added an example for you. And so this is actually, and for those of you that are doing this on behalf of your organization, I would definitely, you know, run it past your legal team. But it should say something along the lines of, you know, thanks for contacting us. You know, since this is public and we want to protect your privacy, we won't respond to blah, blah, blah online. But, you know, feel free to contact so-and-so for further information. And really, you need these disclaimers to protect your employees as well as your organization. So this is what that means, and this is how it can be done, and it can be very, very simple. And the last bit that I have on here is you'll notice that with your social media insights, you'll know who accessed you from where. You'll know which of your tweets are really making a splash and where nobody's listening and you have crickets playing in the background. And then the example that I have on here for customer service is actually with Capital One. What was really interesting is, you know, and this was published in CNN Money, but it talks about how Capital One has utilized their Twitter account as their customer service information. And what they've done is Capital One's team signs in their tweets with their names. And so this will be something that you have to discuss and design within your policy so when someone is talking to them on Twitter, you know, and maybe there's an issue with their card or so on and so forth, they can actually reach out to that individual and be able to say, I talked to so-and-so. So this was an amazing example for me because there's all types of information out there. There's examples, for instance, on how American Airlines has used Twitter to handle customer service. Zappos is using Twitter to handle customer service, so on and so forth. So this is just a way to be able to say, hey, we read it, we've got it handled, send us, you know, you always want to address them and then take it offline. That's the other really important thing when dealing with customer service, for instance, is being able to say, hey, I hear you, you didn't like your Frappuccino, shoot me an email. Here's my email, and I'd love to, continue the conversation. And this basically removes any kind of negativity, for instance, or discontent off of this viral way of communicating to a more personalized, interactive approach to be able to say, we're taking care of you, but we're not going to let you blast us online. So this is just another way to be able to keep in mind on some examples. And so I also included a policy example. Does anybody have any questions so far before we get moving on the policy stuff? Is everybody hanging on? I think Kristen's going to get a job out of this after all. Very good. Thanks, Kristen. I just want to make sure everyone's following, so, sometimes it can get a bit long and winded. So the last bit that I have on here is really about, our rock star companies or social media groups that are really doing a good job. And this is something, as I mentioned before, we're not new to this anymore. This isn't something that you need buy-in. This is where people start understanding that I have to do this. And so a really great example I found was with Kodak. And a big part of what Kodak's media coverage is about is really content creation. And so for those of you that are out here, and this is actually really relevant to all of us, regardless of where or what we're focusing on, is so that is basically products, how-to, or the various things to utilize within that various product. They have educational information. They have the various events. And then they have campaigns, and that's all under content creation. So maybe a bucket for you and your organization could be content creation, right? That's one of my goals. The other thing that they focus on is their distribution, right? So business to customer or business to business, from PR to email marketing to Facebook and trade show events. This is about making it viral. So you'll have to set up a communication plan, and that's also covered in the previous webinar. I just want to make sure that people understand a lot of this is going to be based on you just sitting down and answering some of these questions, because it's really, really important to be able to kind of understand, maybe this is going to work for Kodak, but not so much for you. Debbie asks, can you list other companies besides Kodak and Capital One that we can check out for best practices? Absolutely, and they're actually included in that link on the Capital One page. They have 10 companies. They have Facebook, of course, Walmart, Macy's, and so on and so forth. So you'll go ahead and see, and they each utilize various tools best, so you'll have to go through and see which ones are best practices based on what they're doing. Verizon is another one. They do really good job with their cover on Facebook, with their timeline, and so on and so forth. The next one that they have is engagement, and so two-way engagement communication, and this is really about conversations. And sometimes they're going to be fantastic, and sometimes people are going to say, hey, this really sucks. I'm really upset because I want a pumpkin spice latte and I'm diabetic and you don't have any diabetic options, right? So, by the way, that's a Starbucks example. And so what you have to do is figure out, okay, when someone is, unhappy with my product or with my service or with my center or with one of my employees, what is going to be the protocol for me to be able to manage that conversation? And not delete or or run away. And sometimes there are crazy people out there, so you have to be careful on how you're communicating and when to cut people off. But overall, winning somebody over via social media and the way you respond to their frustration, I mean, sometimes it's really valid, and people you don't know what their situation is, and so it's important to have some things in mind to be able to kind of walk through that. And then, of course, the last bit is measures. So whether it's leads, whether it's awareness, and then whether your reach is increased, and so on and so forth. So I actually included the social media policies for Kodak, and I'm going to go through it very slowly, very quickly, so that we have enough time for questions. But the first one, and these are all, the reason I picked this is because it's such common sense stuff. And I think that a lot of people just don't expect it. They expect this like super duper specific clauses, disclosure agreements, so on and so forth. And it's just common sense stuff. So the first one is live the Kodak values. So you can just go ahead and insert your organizational name here. And what that means is just express ideas and opinions in a respectful manner, right? And so it's about you're communicating in good taste. If you're redirecting somewhere else, make sure that you're sensitive to the type of content that you're sending people to, and then you're not insulting folks or kind of talking badly about your competitors. And this may be in any type of way. This is really important kind of business practices, right? The number 2 for Kodak was just to be yourself and be transparent. And a big way to kind of get around that, especially when you have your employees talking about your brand, is to be able to say, have your policy state, hey, on your Twitter handle, you can go ahead and tweet on behalf of Illinois WorkNet, but go ahead and say, hey, these opinions and expressions are my own and don't reflect so-and-so company. And so a lot of that includes, if this person is authorized, they may use company logos and trade dress and communications, but be sure not to include like your brand symbols or whatever in your own personal stuff. So for instance, I do tons of webinars and workshops for Illinois WorkNet, but I also do other stuff for my nonprofit or whatnot. And so being able to say, hey, I'm tweeting this on behalf of me, not on behalf of Illinois WorkNet, right? So it's really important to be able to have that kind of information and have your staff know about that. The third thing here is really about protecting confidential information. And so really it's, and it gives you a couple different bullet points to kind of go through, but it's about not discussing proprietary information, understanding what is and what is not accessible in any type of communication. And a lot of this is going to be based on your conduct guide or the various contracts that you have with your organization. And so it's really about getting permission from folks if you're going to post their picture online, and then the type of information you're using to basically identify your vendors or your partners, and so on and so forth. Number 4 is about being honest, right? So make sure that your information is current. Things are always changing, and so if somebody's kind of criticizing about something, make sure that your response is, is an accurate and current response based on what's going on. Number 5 is keeping it cool. So as much as somebody may piss you off, and people will piss you off, and I'm sure I keep defaulting to Chelsea, but I know we get lots and lots of crazy emails all the time, and so it's just really, really important to create dialogue. And people are just not always going to agree, and you have to be able to articulate what you need to say in a clear and logical way. Even if, because people can always make mistakes, and we can all make mistakes, and we could all have very different ways of looking at things. So you just kind of, recaps number 1 about just really being respectful to people. Number 6 is timely. We talked about this a lot on the previous webinar, but, I can't stress it enough. If you are doing this, online, it can't be stuff from, 3 weeks ago. It has to be stuff from today. And if you don't get it on, in a timely manner, it's not going to be relevant anymore. So that's super important to kind of get that information out there. And then, the bigger part of that, is to really be able to be careful with your personal information. And so one of the best examples is, because we're tweeting in real time, maybe you shouldn't tell people you're on vacation. even though I did when I went on vacation, but I have a very protected network, right? So it's really important, because you don't want somebody burglarizing your house or whatnot. So just be careful with the type of information that you're sharing. And then the type of folks that you'll notice on here, the type of folks that are going to kind of send you information because you're really out there on the internet and it's easy to find, and so all the various 419ers with dear Juana, your so and so aunt is dying and you need to send money. Just be really careful that you don't get kind of suckered into viruses, let alone people really hacking into your information. And especially these days, our phones are connected to our you know email accounts and so on and so forth. So it's really important to keep that information safe. And then disable dangerous privileges. And so it's really about the various ways to be able to kind of know what kind of software is safe, where everything is kind of built in these days, and just pay attention to the kind of things that pop up when you're sharing information. The last one that I have on here is about security settings and so on and so forth. And so it's really, and you'll notice the more and more things you subscribe to, and this is actually very relevant. You may think like, oh, this is no big deal. To be able to engage, you'll have to connect with lots of folks, and you'll subscribe to lots of things, and then there's ads and all of those things. So just be mindful that these things are safe things to click on and important and relevant to your organization. All of this, of course, is from the Kodak social media tips, and so you can go ahead and click on that, and it'll take you directly to that PDF. I'm going to give you a minute, and so you can go ahead and actually add that. Let me see if I can copy it to the chat pod. And that's it. This is my information. I'm going to go ahead and scoot over to the Q&A portion. I'm going to do my shameless plug and go ahead and follow me on Twitter and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to answer any questions or give you tips. And just to give you an idea, what was really interesting in preparing for this webinar, this being the last of the series is interesting because we've had a lot of folks, so we presented a lot of this information as workNet to the various states in this region, and it's just interesting how folks are really reaching out to us saying, hey, we need help. How do I deal with workers off time, or how do I deal with going through the various content on the type of questions that are being asked. And so, feel free to reach out. I'll shoot you an email. I'll help you in any way I can. And then also go ahead and rate the webinar below. We provide all of these resources for free based on the type of feedback that we get. So it's really important to let us know if we've done a good job. And so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and take questions if you have any. I'm sure there's plenty of folks kind of going through saying, oh my God, how do I cover all of this? And I've been talking so much. I'd be up for somebody else doing a little bit of talking today. Sounds like everybody's doing a good job. So our next steps for your social media policy, as part of your follow-up email, you're going to get the items included in the various little pods that we use to help you basically get started on your social media policy. So I'll put together kind of a worksheet for you to say, okay, these are my big bucket items, these are the questions I need to ask myself, and then this is how I need to think about it. So that's what you'll get, and this is all part of all of your contributions today. So it's always exciting to have a working webinar because you really walk away with something, and you feel like you've had all of these other folks kind of share this information and help you build your strategy. So I think it's very relevant and valuable, and I appreciate everyone's collaboration on this. It looks like everybody's okay. Alrighty. Well, for those of you, there is one more session tomorrow morning if you want to refresher and kind of maybe you didn't hear some of the stuff covered earlier, you're more than welcome to join us again tomorrow. I will try not to use the same jokes, and then go ahead and use the same link. It's all accessible from the link in your reminder email. So with that said, I will go ahead and say goodbye, and thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.